Between 1900 and 1920, more than 4 million Italians immigrated to the United States, with 3 million arriving between 1900 and 1914. This was the largest number of immigrants from any ethnic group in such a short period of time. Most of these immigrants came from the poverty-stricken areas of southern Italy and Sicily. Today, the Americans of Italian ancestry are the nation's fifth largest ethnic group. The Salvaggios were to be part of that movement. The Salvaggio journey begins from their village, Ribabatoni. To get to Naples, it's going to be roughly 64 miles for them to get to Naples. The Rossi family and the Salvaggio family were only 17 miles apart when they lived in Italy. Of course, the Salvaggios are from Ribabatoni and the Rossis are from Acquaviva. The little village of Ribabatoni had a population around 4,000. Mostly they were all peasants, and they worked the mountain slopes of this village itself. As you can see, this is one of the buildings of that town of Ribabatoni, and you can see by the dress of the people that they really did live in poverty. The story of the Salvaggios begins in December 6, 1899, when Fernando and Nicola Maria, and she was a Piedmont, Salvaggio, were married. For Nicola, her mother's name was Maria Michelle Piedmont. She will name one of her children Michelle, and the other daughter, Albina, will marry a Piedmont. Decades of internal conflict, volcanoes, plus diseases, and there were a number of earthquakes that shook that region of Italy. And this was reason enough for Fernando to consider moving to the United States. The draw to the United States now for Fernando was not only because of the volcanoes, the violence that was occurring in his land, was the price for a transatlantic voyage across the Atlantic Ocean now had become affordable for him. Fernando had a sister living in Monroe, and she was married to a Tedora. Fernando decides to make the journey to the United States in 1907. At the time, he was 29 years of age. He will book passage on the transatlantic steamer called Cedric, and this is his manifest. He arrives in the United States in 1907 of March. As Fernando was processed into the United States, he will arrive in Monroe and live with his brother-in-law, John Todaro, which he later changed his name to Todora, and his sister, who is Mary Salvaggio, but she's married to John Todora, and they will reside at 208 East Humboldt. As previously stated, John Todoro, or Todora, was married to Mary Salvaggio, which is the sister of Fernando. United States, Ferdinando will then send for his wife, Nicola Maria Salvaggio. In 1908, Nicola Maria Salvaggio will arrive in the United States, bringing with her was 3 children, and financially it's all she had in her possession was $20. Can you imagine what it would be like traversing the Atlantic Ocean, which would took her 14? The ship manifests. It shows when she arrives, which was in September 11th, 1908. At that time of arrival, she was 30 years of age. In this 1908 trip that she took across the ocean, the children's names were Alta, sometimes called Albina, or she was also sometimes called Mary, and Michelle was also called Maggie, and Francesco. They will also book a passage. These are the 3 manifests for the 3 children that Nicola brought with her to the United States. And a little story is told that Michelle, which would be the second oldest of the 3 girls, she cried about leaving not only Italy, but she did not want to leave her grandma. Once Maria Nicola Salvaggio arrives in Monroe, she will take up residency at 62 East Humphrey Street with her husband Ferdinando. And while they are living in the United States, the following children will be born to them. These are the children born in the United States. Leo. Pearl is the tallest one in this communion picture. Julia is on the right, and Frances, the youngest of all the daughters, is on the left. This is their first communion picture. These are 4 photos of the children as adults. They're Albina, also known as Maria, and also known as Alta, and Maggie, which was Michelle, Leo, and Nick. Of all the children that they had born here in the United States, Raphael will die of pneumonia when he was about 1 year old. When Pearl was a young girl, she contracted scarlet fever. This fever severely impacted her. It will leave her mentally and physically challenged for the rest of her life. In 1913, tragedy again will strike the Salvaggio family. Tragedy strikes the Salvaggio family again. This time it will be Francesca. She was coming home from school, which was Lincoln School, where she attended classes, and there were 2 sets of railroad tracks on Kentucky Avenue, and she was heading for her home on Humphrey Street. After being struck by the train, a gentleman saw her laying on the ground, picked her up, and rushed her to a children's hospital. This was really a hospital for the blind here in Monroe, and it's located on Vine Street. Of course, this is where she's going to die. Can you imagine that little... With all the turmoil, losing a young son, losing a young daughter, life had to go on. And the Salvaggio family will eventually purchase a home at 420 Jerome Street, which is close to the Woodland Cemetery. Here they're going to reside for the rest of This is Frances' birth certificate. It's interesting to note that her spelling of her name is incorrect. They spelled it with an I. An I is a man's name. And also they had her dad's name wrong because they had it Fred Salvi, not Selva. At the birth of young Frances Salvaggio, her mother decided to name her after her sister that was killed. So Frances is a derivative of Francesca. The Salvaggio children will all be educated. The only one that will not go any further into school will be Pearl because of her mentally challenged situation. The boys, they will attend the Holy Divine Child. At that time, the Holy Divine Child opened about in 1918, and it became a full military school in 1936. When Nick and Leo attended school, they accepted day and resident students. For the girls, their education was a little bit different. They either went to Lincoln School for a short period of time, and then when St. Joseph's School was open, they attended St. Joseph's School. All their education was conducted at the elementary school. They did not go any further than the 8th grade. Frances Salvaggio, things are a little bit different. She wanted to go on to high school badly. But once she finished St. Joseph's School, her parents told her no, it would be impossible for her to go any further in her education. She was required to work. But one of the things she did, because she wanted to go to high school, one of the reasons that Frances Salvaggio had to work was that in 1929 there was a depression, and both the Rossi family and Salvaggio families were impacted by this depression. They would buy their food on credit, and there were two stores that they predominantly went to. One, the Potts grocery store is the first job that she ever had, and she had to work here because they had a large food bill there at the store, and her job was to work there and pay off that food bill. She said that she worked from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Working 4 years at Potts, Frances went to work for Steinbeck Grocery Store, which was located on the corner of Sackett and Noble. Initially, she always said that this store that she worked at was located at Sackett and Vine, but there's no such store there that exists. This is the second job that she had. It's time to look at the marriages of the Salvaggio family. Or Mary Salvaggio marries Michael Piedmont. Michelle, or Maggie, marries Tom D'Onofrio. And Leo Salvaggio marries Thelma Cooley. Julia Salvaggio will marry Anthony Maletti. Nick Salvaggio marries Edith Mabe. And Pearl never marries, and Frances, of course, marries Pasquale Rossi. Upon reaching adulthood, all the married girls at one point in time will then move close or live right next to their mother home at 420 Jerome Street. Albina, which is also called Mary, will live right next to her mother at 418 Jerome Street. Maggie, also known as Michelle. These are the homes of the girls of the Salvaggio family. The Piedmont home is 418 Jerome Street. This is the Alta, or Mary Salvaggio. The D'Onofrio's home is on 623 East 4th Street, which we had discussed. And the Maletti home is For the male family members, things were a little bit different. Things are going to change drastically for them because the Selective Service Training Act was passed in October 1940, which would require all men between the ages of 21 and 45 to register for the draft. With the draft in place, all the Salvaggio young men now have to sign up for the military. Leo Salva, who's living at 802 East 3rd Street, will give his address for the contact person at 420 Jerome Street, which would be his dad. The Salvaggio brother is Nick, and it's a little bit different because the person for contact, he doesn't list his dad, he lists Mike Piedmont as his dad, and the address of that person, 418 Jerome Street. And you notice he worked for River Raisin Paper Company at the time that he is drafted November 23rd, 1943, and it came about roughly a year after his father's death. When he is drafted, he is 26 years of age when he entered the military. We do not know at this point in time if Leo was ever in the military. Life becomes a whirlwind. He was married September 14th, 1941. His daughter Margaret was born October 20th, 1942. And with the advent of World War II, he now is drafted December the 23rd, 1943. And during this war, he will be severely wounded. Once in the military, Nick Salvaggio becomes a military hero. At Barbano, Italy, on April 28, 1945, he is severely wounded while he's running towards the enemy, drawing fire upon himself so his squad members can surround the enemy and take the enemy out. For this brave Barbano, Italy is roughly 31 miles from Rome, to give you an idea of the vicinity of where his action took place. After he recovered from his wounds, he's given his military citations, as you can see in this photo that appeared in Monroe Evening News. His honors were quite extensive. He had the SR Score Lapel Pin Button, Combat Infantry Battle Rifle Badge, 2 overseas. All this first generation of Italian immigrant sons were the result of the Salvaggio marriage and the result of their offspring. Each of these young men served valiantly for their country, but one received numerous honors, battlefield distinctions, and it's ironic that a lot of these awards took place. All the sons of the Salvaggio offspring that served in World War II. Of course, you have Nick, who's Maria Salvaggio's son, John, Fred, Nick, Anthony, and Al were all from the Piedmont family. And then Maggie D'Onofrio's son, John Piedmont, the oldest of the Piedmont boys, served in the Army Air Force. Fred Piedmont was the second oldest. He served in the U.S. Navy. Nick Piedmont was in the U.S. Army. And Al Piedmont also served, he was the youngest of the boys, served in the U.S. There are a number of misfortunes that will strike the Salvaggio family. Over the years, these families had many setbacks. They had to survive the Depression, which is very difficult, not just for the Salvaggios, but anybody living during that time period. Francesca, of course, was killed by train in 1913. This is the Salvaggio family's gravestone in St. Joseph Cemetery. To the left is Francesca's stone, and to the right is Raphael. All the children were buried next to their mother in St. Joseph's Cemetery. Now, how did the Rossi and Salvaggio family become united? Well, it all began on a movie night in 1936 with friends that changed young Francesco Salvaggio's life. On that particular night, Pasquale Rossi was also attending the same theater. A spark was ignited and of entertainment was, of course, with the movies. And as young people, they would attend those movies. But these were the theaters that they would attend. There was the Reaper Theater, which is a Lamore printing building now, located on Front Street. The Family Theater, which no longer exists, which was on Monroe Street. And then next, Frances tells a story. She remembers seeing Pasquale at St. Joseph's Elementary School when they were attending school there. However, Pasquale dropped out of 7th grade, and she never saw him again until that movie night. It was Pasquale Miracle, a real close friend of Pasquale Rossi, that encouraged her. After a courtship, they were engaged in 1936. They were so happy that they found each other, but unbeknownst to them, it would create a family difficulty. The turmoil that resulted from the engagement wasn't that they were against the engagement or that they disliked Pasquale. It was the idea of what Pasquale had planned, what he was going to do regarding his own father. The marriage date was set for June the 3rd, 1937, but Pasquale had planned to buy a home on Kentucky Avenue. This was his vision for his new wife. Now this troubled the Salvaggio family. They thought it was wrong to leave Vincenzo, his father, alone to raise the. And the discussion began. The Salvaggio family wanted their daughter, Frances, to go into the home at 742 Winchester and raise the two sisters and care for Vincenzo and Pasquale once they were married. Pasquale was totally against this idea. He knew it was asking too much of his soon-to-be wife, yet the Salvaggio family, including the sisters, persisted that she should step into that household and run that household at 742 Winchester. The Salvaggio family kept persisting, including her sisters, that Frances should take over the house at 742 Winchester. Eventually, Frances agrees, but there were two major conditions that she said they had to be done. First, they had to install an indoor bathroom. This was the outhouse at 742 Winchester Street that she objected to have to use. Of course, in the center picture, you see Pasquale and Frances of their new bedroom that was finally built in 1939. To the right is the present-day home with that same bedroom. June 3rd, 1937, it is good to note that there were a number of families that were brought together because of the wedding of the Rossi and Salvaggio. First of all, there's going to be the Salvaggio family, which would be Fernando Salvaggio as the head. Then there's the Rossi Mariano, which Nicola Mariano was the head. In order that we should point out all the family members that were involved in the wedding. For example, Fernando Maria Salvaggio's children, both Leo and Nick, were involved in the wedding. Mike and Albina, or Mary Salvaggio Piedmont children, were John, Fred were in the wedding, Antoinette Salvaggio. June 3rd, 1937, this is the wedding party. You have Leo Salvaggio to the left, her brother. Then you have John Salvaggio Piedmont, Mary Piedmont's oldest son. Then, of course, there's Pasquale Rossi, Frances Rossi. Then you have Antoinette Piedmont, which was the niece to Mike Piedmont, which was Frances. An unknown fact to the family members was that Antoinette Piedmont, the niece of Mike Piedmont, who was Frances Salvaggio's maid of honor, was a nun at one time. She could have either been a Dominican or Carmelite nun. Once the wedding was over with, Frances was going to ship her wedding dress back to Italy because it was borrowed. It had to be borrowed from somebody back in Italy and probably was a Salvaggio family member. Frances and Pasquale do not go on a honeymoon, and they're going to go right to 742 Winchester to begin their. once married, life now evolves as a married couple, and they are a happy couple, and this is going to be the result. We are the first generation that has resulted from the Rossi Salvaggio family. From left to right, there's Joe, John, Fred, Kathy, Roseanne, and Vince. There is a marvelous quote that fits our reunion and the descendants of the Rossi Salvaggio family. We come together to water our roots. Yes, it all began with a little boy that arrived in the United States with his mother in 1919. This is the result of that merger of the two families. It's still growing, and the Rossi family journey continues with each succeeding generation. There's going to be other stories to be told in the future. We have to take a look at who Mother Cabrini was to understand how she became a patron saint of the Italians. In 1880, she wanted to join a religious order, but they would not accept her because of her ill health. So in 1889, she created her own religious order, which was called the Institute of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. In 1889, she would come to New York City and work at what was called the Five Points, which was a very dangerous area in New York City. And she would work among the poor. Particularly, she opened up orphanage, and there were many Italian orphans that were living in the sewers of New York City. They dreamed a better life, and we are fortunate that we're the recipients of their dream. We should all cherish our heritage and be thankful that a little boy by the name of Pasquale Rossi and his mother by the name of Rosa came to the United States in 1919.